chairperson of the Coalition for Clean and Fair Elections, Bersih, Thomas Fan, to give some opening remarks. The floor is yours, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Ben, for the opportunity to do this opening. And good evening to all the illustrious panelists who are with us in this Zoom room, and also those who are watching online. We are very glad to be hosting this discussion on Constituency Development Fund. Now, this is basically the allocation that governments give out to elected representatives, whether they are MPs or at state level, to the ADUNs, so that they can carry out their responsibilities to their constituents in their kawasan, in their area. But it is also a sad fact that this allocation are not given to all representatives. And more often than not, opposition's members of parliament or ADUN do not receive this allocation in equal amount if they do receive at all. But this is something that we in Bersih and together with other NGO partners like Ideas have been advocating for. And the reason why we are so consistent and firm in advocating for equal constituency development fund for the opposition, whether it was during Barisan National government time, we have issued statement, we call for funding for the opposition Pakatan Harapan at that time, or whether during Pakatan's time, when Pakatan took over in GE 14, we also call for the same allocation to be given to the opposition in Barisan National, PAS, and other MPs. They did, but they gave totally unequal. Government MPs get something like 3.8 million ringgit a year, whereas oppositions get something like 100,000, if I'm not mistaken, at that time, totally unequal. And we were critical of the government then. And of course, after Sheraton moved, the government came in and continued the same posture, unequal, totally unequal. And we believe that it is time, that the government, the unity government of Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, start to change that by giving out equal constituency development fund to all MPs regardless. And there's a few reasons. Number one is just a matter of principle. If it was wrong to you when you were in opposition that you were not given, it is wrong of you today not to give to the opposition. A matter of principle, need to do the right thing. Second thing, in Pakatan case, and I believe even in Barisan National, who is part of the unity government, Equal Constituency Development Fund is a manifesto promise. So keep your promise. Third thing, that why this is important, I think it is about time Malaysia move to the next level of political maturity. We have to bring to an end winner takes all and loser get punished or get nothing. We have to respect the opposition as duly elected representative of the rakyat. The rakyat is not just those whose choice form government, but the rakyat includes those who voted for the party or the coalition that did not form government. And we need to respect the rakyat in this and give due recognition by giving allocation to their elected representative so that they can serve their constituents for the reason that they were elected for. So I think this is a strong advocacy, and we are glad that different politicians from both sides even are speaking up about this matter. And today, as Ben has said, the Prime Minister has said that he is not against. Well, right now, it is the prerogative of the Prime Minister, solely his prerogative to give or not to give. But we are saying go one better, make this into a law so that it is no longer the prerogative of any Prime Minister. So with that, I look forward to the discussion by the esteemed panelists moderated by Ben. So back to you, Ben. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for that insightful opening remarks. I really like what you said about the need for political maturity that Malaysia we have to come to an age, a time where we respect the mandate of the rakyat and to put in, to respect them for who they voted for. It's not about punishing them for voting for the opposition or otherwise. Now, thank you so much once again, Thomas Fan. Now, before we move to our forum session, just to outline how we're going to do the session tonight, we're going to start with a forum. I'm going to be asking questions to our illustrious panel. Some of the questions will be in English, some of the questions will be in Malay. So feel free to.
Dari segi keselamatan.
And right after that, that will take about 50 minutes. And then at 9 p.m., I'll open the time for a session of Q&A, question and answer from all our participants, both on Zoom and also on Facebook Live. As again, I said earlier, you can ask questions in any language that you're comfortable in, preferably English and Malay, if that's possible. Yeah, not any other languages. All right, and so to introduce our panel for today, just to start off, we have Sri Murniati, who's a Deputy Research Director from Ideas. She's also an expert in government procurement, budget and fiscal transparency, and also the governance of extractive industry. A friend of mine, I'm so happy to have her here today. We also have YB Amira Aisha, the Adun of Putri Wangsa from Muda, who is also the Deputy President of Muda. Really good to have you today, YB Amira. And now we also welcome YB Fadli Shari, the Member of Parliament for Pasir Mas from Perikatan Nasional, who is also the Youth Chief of PAS and Perikatan Nasional. Terima kasih kerana menyertai kita hari ini, YB Tuan Fadli. I think YB Tuan Fadli is tuning in from Parliament itself because it's a really busy day. We also have one more speaker coming in slightly later, YB Howard Lee, the Member of Parliament for Ipoh Timur from Pakatan Harapan. He is the former Youth Chief of DAP and Pakatan Harapan. I understand that he was called to give a speech in Parliament right at 8 p.m. So hopefully he will join us right after that. So once again, all our participants, if you have any questions, feel free to type it out. Later on at 9 p.m., we'll open the session for a time of Q&A. Now, I'm going to jump right in to my very first question. It's an exciting question. And this question diajukan kepada YB Tuan Ahmad Fadli. Tuan Ahmad Fadli, baru-baru ini dalam belanjawan 2023 yang baharu, peruntukan CDF saksama atau peruntukan pembangunan kawasan untuk semua ahli parlimen tidak dinyatakan secara nyata dalam belanjawan baharu. Walaupun tawaran ini telah dijanjikan dalam manifesto pilihan raya. Namun pada pagi ini, Perdana Menteri baru menegaskan bahawa beliau tidak pernah menolak prinsip untuk memberikan peruntukan yang sama atau yang saksama kepada ahli-ahli pembangkang di Parlimen. Pada pandangan anda, YB Tuan Fadli, apakah pandangan anda terhadap kenyataan tersebut? Adakah CDF yang saksama akan direalisasikan dalam masa terdekat? YB Fadli.
Selamat petang kepada semua. Terima kasih kerana menjemput saya pada malam ini. Mohon maaf sedikit keadaan yang kurang selesa sebab sekarang ini saya sedang berada di Parlimen dan sidang Parlimen masih lagi berlanjutan mungkin sampai ke 9 ke 10 malam pada malam ini. Baik, bercakap tentang peruntukan Parlimen ini, saya mengalu-alukan kenyataan yang berhormat Perdana Menteri bahawa beliau tidak pernah memotong ataupun menyatakan bahawa peruntukan ahli-ahli parlimen pembangkang ini dipotong, tetapi perlu kepada perbincangan. Cumanya saya agak kurang jelas apakah perbincangan yang dimaksudkan oleh beliau, kerana peruntukan yang saksama telah dijanjikan di dalam manifesto Kita Boleh yang dilancarkan oleh Pakatan Harapan di dalam kempen pilihan raya yang lepas. Jadi pada saya sepatutnya tidaklah perlu untuk menunggu kepada perbincangan. Kalaulah yang dikhawatiri peruntukan ini digunakan untuk perkara-perkara yang bukan dengan maksudnya yang sebenar, kita boleh untuk menandatangani apa jua surat akuan, sebagaimana apabila kita berada di peringkat di dalam kerajaan pun, apabila kita masuk tahun yang baru, kita dimestikan untuk mendatangi akuan bersumpah bahawa peruntukan ini untuk tujuan-tujuannya yang telah ditentukan, dan sudah pasti peruntukan ini akan terbuka untuk diaudit. Saya mendengar tadi daripada saudara Thomas Mann yang menyebut bahawa peruntukan yang tidak sama telah pun dilaksanakan oleh kerajaan sebelum daripada ini. Ia satu kenyataan yang saya kira betul, cuma saya nak memberikan suatu pembetulan sedikit ataupun maklumat tambahan bahawa pada waktu ketika Kerajaan Barisan Nasional, ahli-ahli Parlimen Pembangkang langsung tidak diberikan peruntukan. Kemudian ketika Pakatan Harapan mengambil alih kerajaan selama 22 bulan, ahli-ahli Parlimen Pembangkang diberikan peruntukan RM100,000 sebulan, setahun, berbanding dengan peruntukan ahli-ahli Parlimen Kerajaan yang pada masa itu mungkin saya dimaklumkan dalam 3.5-3.8 juta setahun. Kemudian apabila kerajaan Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri sebagai Perdana, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin sebagai Perdana Menteri, dasar yang sama diamalkan, iaitu kerajaan dapat 3.8 juta dan pembangkang dapat 100,000. Tetapi ketika berlakunya COVID-19, program bakul makanan, MP pembangkang juga diberikan peruntukan 300,000 untuk MP pembangkang pada masa itu. Dan ia merupakan satu langkah baru ke arah untuk memberikan satu peruntukan yang sama rata. Dan akhirnya pada ketika Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri menjadi Perdana Menteri, pembangkang akhirnya diberikan peruntukan 3.8 juta sebagaimana kerajaan yang dapat 3.8 juta. Jadi dalam ketika pentadbiran kerajaan Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri, peruntukan yang sama telah diberikan. Timbul satu hujah bahawa pada zaman ketika kerajaan Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri pada masa itu, kerana adanya CSA yang ditandatangani oleh ahli-ahli parlimen pembangkang untuk untuk menyokong apa-apa jua usul. Tetapi kalau saya menerima hujah itu, mengambil maklum bahawa itulah dia hujah yang digunakan, CSA yang ditandatangani. Saya kira kalaulah untuk nak dapatkan peruntukan ini perlu ataupun syarat yang tanda tangan CSA, ya kita boleh buka kepada apa jua perundingan. Tetapi sebenarnya kalau kita perhatikan, walaupun CSA ditandatangani, pembangkang pada masa itu tetap menolak usul-usul yang pada mereka itu tidak sesuai dengan pendirian mereka. Saya ambil contoh, kerajaan Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri pernah membentangkan usul tentang SOSMA di Dewan Rakyat, tetapi pembangkang menolak. Sedangkan dalam CSA mereka telah pun setuju untuk menerima apa jua usul yang tidak menjejaskan keadaan, sehingga usul tentang SOSMA itu telah ditolak di dalam Dewan Rakyat. Bayangkan, usul yang dibawa oleh kerajaan ditolak di dalam Dewan Rakyat, yang dalam mana-mana kerajaan sekalipun, kerajaan sudah hilang kepercayaan. Pada masa itu, sepatutnya kerajaan sudah hilang kepercayaan kerana usul kerajaan ditolak di dalam Dewan Rakyat. Jadi, pembangkang mengambil sikap untuk menolak usul SOSMA. Pada masa itu, yang sepatutnya dilakukan oleh Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri ialah menghadap menjadi Ketua Agong dan menyatakan bahawa beliau telah hilang satu ataupun salah satu usul ini telah tidak berjaya dilaksanakan. Artinya, tidaklah dalam semua perkara pembangkang menyokong kerajaan di dalam Dewan Rakyat pada masa itu. Hujah saya ialah CSA tidaklah dilaksanakan sepenuhnya pada masa itu dan peruntukan itu tetap disalurkan. Sehingga kalau nak dikirakan bahawa kalaulah CSA itu untuk pembangkang memberikan sokongan kepada kerajaan pada masa itu, pembangkang kalau mereka tak sokong kerajaan, kerajaan terpaksa bubar parlimen. Yang tak nak kepada pilihan raya pada masa itu ialah pembangkang. Pembangkang tak nak pilihan raya, kami Perikatan Nasional pun tak nak pilihan raya. pada waktu itu, kalau tuan-tuan masih lagi ingat. Yang nak pilihan raya ialah Barisan Nasional sahaja yang nak kepada pilihan raya. Jadi CSA saya melihat tidak ada apa-apa justifikasi untuk kita meletakkan sebab kepada CSA untuk dapatkan peruntukan. Walau apa pun, saya kira bahawa ini adalah merupakan suatu peluang untuk kita menunjukkan reformasi ke arah yang lebih baik. Tadi saya mendengar hujah-hujah daripada ahli-ahli Parlimen Kerajaan. Mereka berkata bahawa pembangkang nak peruntukan yang sama rata. Adakah Kelantan bagi sama rata kepada adun pembangkang? Ini hujah mereka. Terengganu adakah bagi sama rata kepada pembangkang? Saya fikir kalaulah hujah ini digunakan, kita juga boleh tanya, adakah Selangor bagi pembentukan yang sama rata kepada adun pembangkang, Negeri Sembilan bagi pembentukan sama rata kepada adun pembangkang. Jadi saya fikir bahawa kalau nak diletakkan sebab itu kepada kerajaan-kerajaan negeri, sampai bila kita tidak akan melangkah ke depan di dalam melaksanakan agenda reformasi seperti ini. Jadi pada saya, kerajaan sudah boleh untuk nak bertindak dan meletakkan agenda ini sebagai suatu titik ke depan, tunjukkan persepsi kepada rakyat benar-benar kita inginkan reformasi. Secara peribadi, saya sendiri tidaklah terbeban sangat apabila peruntukan yang tidak diberikan, kerana rakyat tahu peruntukan tidak diberikan kepada ahli parlimen pembangkang, jadi mereka tidaklah mengharapkan sangat. Cuma ia satu missing opportunity lah, satu peluang yang terlepas untuk kita menunjukkan agenda reformasi kita. Jadi menjawab soalan itu, adakah akan diberikan pada masa terdekat? Ia terletak kepada Perdana Menteri dan kerajaan yang ada pada hari ini. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih YB Tuan Fadli untuk perkongsian anda. Nanti saya akan ulaskan sedikit lagi atau mengetengahkan beberapa isi yang penting. Tapi sebelum itu, saya nak mengutarakan perkara yang telah diketengahkan oleh YB Tuan Fadli bahawa beberapa negeri masih belum melaksanakan peruntukan yang saksama seperti Kelantan, Terengganu dan juga Selangor. Tapi selain Perak, Johor also was one of the first states, right, which provided equal allocation in 2021, if I remember correctly, 200,000 to both government and opposition aduns. Now we have YB Amira Aisyah with us, Adun of Puteri Wangsa. I would like to ask you, YB Amira, how has this equal allocation of 200,000 for both government and opposition aduns, how has it been beneficial to all the state constituencies from your perspective? YB, the floor is yours.
Very much. First of all, hello everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for having me here. Well, in Johor, for example, we have the equal allocation for every adun of Kerajaan so pembangkang. And furthermore, for example, here, we also get another 1,000 ringgit for 1,000 ringgit. And that and I think it is very important. Equal allocation. I would rather use equal allocation rather than favorite. Or actually, because proceed to ensure fairness and again largely for constituency.
Sorry, YB Amira, you're getting cut off quite a bit.
Hello, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Can you repeat the last probably 1 minute of what you said?
All right, sorry. So as I was saying just now, is that it's important for politicians of all at every level, either you are in a federal level, from the government, or you are from the opposition bench, it is important to understand allocation. Well, at the end of it, for example, in my duty as an adun, this money is allocated into two. Number one, to be directly given to the people. For example, cash help for those who are facing their lives, food So, for example, in a recent case of the
Sorry,
for
YB
flood.
Amira. You're getting cut off quite a bit again. It's possible to change the microphone or maybe the
Okay.
line. I'm so sorry.
Can you just give me a moment for a while?
Yes,
If I can
yes,
just
yes.
let me just grab my
I'm
earphone.
so sorry, YB. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. I give you a moment to do that. We'll come back to you in a bit. Thank you, YB. All right, we'll continue on with our discussion. Earlier, I think YB Tuan Fadli did bring up a very, very good point in the beginning of his sharing that sebenarnya tidak perlu menunggu untuk perbincangan by what our Prime Minister said this morning. You know, there needs to be negotiation first. Negotiation before there can be equal allocation or equitable allocation given to opposition MPs. Now, I'll just put you on the spot, Sri Murniati. I would like to ask, what do you think of that statement on there needs to be negotiation atau perbincangan dengan antara pihak pembangkang dan pihak kerajaan dahulu sebelum equitable CDF dapat diberikan? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, first, the peruntukan parlimen comes from peruntukan khas kepada YB Perdana Menteri. Dan peruntukan khas kepada YB Perdana Menteri tujuannya adalah untuk membantu atau menutup kekurangan-kekurangan projek perbelanjaan dalam RMK. Memberikan bantuan kepada masyarakat. So, I think if the MP allocation then part of this allocation for the Prime Minister, and for that purpose, negotiation ideally should not be the you know the condition for it to be given, especially because it's clear there's a clear need at the local level, for example, for expedited project development project. Longkang rusak ke, masjid tak ada AC ke, tak ada kipas ke, so small needs like this. Unfortunately for now, the one that actually can deliver this type of assistance quite fast is through MP office. So giving this allocation to MPs equally or equitably, I think should not rest on the process of negotiation. And I would just repeat what Thomas said earlier. We need to institutionalize it. We need to create a legislation that actually make it mandatory for any governments in power to provide this allocation if we need it. Because we know that there is a need at the local level for this kind of allocation.
Thank you, Shri. I really like your point about the need to legislate it. And we'll come back to that point later towards the end of our sharing today, because I think that is crucial, right? To not let it be the prerogative of any prime minister in power or any government in power. Now, coming back to YB Amira, is it clear?
Can you hear me clearer now? Is it okay now?
Yes, much clearer.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you,
okay,
YB.
I'm so sorry. Yeah,
right.
so going back to the question just now, yeah. So as I was saying just now, I think it's important for us to talk about equitable allocation, and this is particularly for at all levels, whether you're in federal level, whether you're in state level. I was giving an example just now as to, let's say, for example, when the flood happens recently in my area, and this happens everywhere else. Usually when the victims are transferred to PPS, Pusat Pemindahan Sementara, of course, the government, either the state government or federal government, will send some assistance to the flood victims. But usually this assistance will not come until perhaps the second day, because the first day when the victims were first transferred, it will take some time before this assistance come, and this assistance can come in as little as, for example, giving them food aid, or a more comfortable like mattresses or selimut, bantal, and all those kind of things. And the allocation that was given to Adun will be very, very handy when it comes to these kinds of situations. For example, even recently when the flood hits Johor, there was sort of like an agreement between all ADUN and also the state government that for the first night, all of us will cover the assistance that was needed at our individual constituency, and then later on, the state government will assist with other assistances. And there were also, for example, cash allocations that were used for the service center to engage with the community programs for our individual officers. That will be very, very important. And also, the system in our country is such that when someone is elected into office, we have to find our own office first and foremost. We have to hire our own staff, and all this requires money. And this money, for example, can be used through the allocation. In Johor, 100,000 ringgit is allocated for development, cashes that we can use for example, if a school asks for help with the repairing of their hall, for example, this is allocated in the 100,000 ringgit. And then you have 50,000 ringgit for handouts, which can be given to, for example, if there are any societies that require some cash funds for a program that they wanna conduct, and another 50,000 ringgit per year for our office. But more often than not, there are a lot of people who need emergency help. Let's say if there's fire happening, or if there's flood, or let's say if there's a need for them to get an instant medical help, for example. We usually have to also use these funds, and so in more often than not, for example, in my case, the office allocation will not be used only for the office allocation. We'll also be using it for other stuff. And that's why I think it's important when we're talking about CDF. For example, I don't really agree with equal allocation. I would rather for us to champion for equitable allocation, because different constituencies have different needs, have different number of people, different demography that might need different amount of allocation. Let's say in Johor, for example, I have 112,000 voters in Puchewangsa in comparison to, let's say, Penang, where they have only 21,000 voters. But we both receive 200,000 ringgit per constituency. And so that means that, allocation per capita per person in my area is a lot smaller in comparison to allocation for those in Penang. That means, again, it will not be fair if you give equal allocations to all. But one thing that I have to stress on is that just to also echo and answer the discussions or the questions before this, is that I think we shouldn't keep on arguing about this yearly and to just look at which government comes into power and whether this government is generous enough to give allocation to the opposition. I think it's high time, prime for us to just put it into legislation, that equitable allocation is something that every government, regardless which political party you're from, every government has to give equitable allocation to both government and also opposition MPs and ADUNs.
Thank you, YB and Mira. Just to echo and highlight what you said earlier, I love what you said about the need for it to be equitable, not just equal. Saksama bukannya sama, ya. Bukan peruntukan amount yang sama, tapi peruntukan yang saksama. Because I'm just reminded of a quote by Rick Riordan, an American author. He says that fairness does not mean everyone gets the same, but fairness means everyone gets what they need. Yeah, and I think it's like what you said, the example of per capita, depending on the number of voters. Like in the federal level, Bangi has 300,000 voters, but Igan Sarawak has 30,000 voters. That's like 1/10 of the amount, right? Yeah, so I think that's a good consideration. Now, on this topic, just also to deviate a bit about the formula for equitable distribution of peruntukan yang saksama. Sri Muryati, do you want to hop in on this? What should the formula be for equitable allocation atau peruntukan yang saksama?
If we look into the example of other countries, well, actually Malaysia doesn't use constituency development fund. There's no such words in the budget documents. If you try to, search it, there's nothing like that. Pun kita tak gunakan peruntukan pembangunan. Yang ada peruntukan ahli parlimen yang diambil dari peruntukan khas kepada YB Perdana Menteri. Tetapi if we look into the nature of the allocation, for what purposes, then when it's equal to constituency development fund that actually exists in about 20 countries in the world. So this is separate from allocation for research, like short money in the UK, for example. That's for research purposes mostly, or for travel. But this one for development and assistance to the constituencies. So this one, constituency development fund. In these countries, at least I think, if I remember correctly from the research that we did, the first one can be the size of the constituencies, like Boy Amira just said, is important because we want to provide adequate assistance to the constituency. Secondly, it can be a level of development. And for example, it can be also poverty level. So for areas in which the poverty rate is higher, the allocation for the MPs can be a little bit higher than others. So there are several equitable formula that can be developed. And I think the most important thing, some countries actually provide the limit. So at least there is a commitment that, say, for example, between 2 to 5% of the annual budget is actually given for constituency development fund. So something like that. So it's clear right now, the number is very inconsistent from year to year, and we just don't know which one, from which allocation is actually taken. We know, for example, that at least during Pakatan Harapan government, there are two sources of funding. The first one is the allocation for outright grant for the unit pelaksanaan pembangunan, the ICU, and the second one that's under operating expenditure. The second one is under project Mesra Rakyat, under the allocation for development expenditure under the Prime Minister. At least those two things. But we know that allocation kepada Prime Minister is a lot higher than the amount listed in these two. So we have actually quite substantial resources to make development expenditure. So in addition to having equitable or equal allocation, Ideas and Bersih has always been advocating for the need for transparency, because this is where it becomes, I mean, the fact that MPs don't even know what's actually given to other MPs. It's very sad for me. This thing needs to be discussed in Parliament, needs to be listed clearly in budget documents. Ini dia peruntukan kepada ahli Parlimen. But we can't even find such thing in the budget document. So I think that's the first thing, the minimum thing, the minimum. If for 2024, I really hope that I want to see if the current government really committed to making the government more transparent. That's the first thing that they can do. Put clearly in the budget documents that this is peruntukan ahli parlimen atau peruntukan kepada khas kepada Perdana Menteri. And I would like to see that happening in 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Shri. Just to echo what you said, really accountability and transparency is key into ensuring that equitable CDF is managed well and distributed well to all MPs. Thank you for highlighting that, Shri. And now we're going to move a bit earlier to a recent controversial statement that the Prime Minister made. Ya, pada bulan Februari tahun 2023, baru-baru ini je, Perdana Menteri Sri Anwar Ibrahim telah mengesahkan bahawa peruntukan tahunan kepada ahli parlimen akan dikurangkan 65% daripada 3.8 juta kepada 1.3 juta sebagai langkah mengawal aliran kewangan negara. Soalan ini diajukan kepada YB Tuan Fadli. Ya. YB Tuan Fadli, adakah pengurangan ini satu langkah yang berpatutan? Dan apakah impak daripada pengurangan peruntukan ini untuk tempoh semasa negara kita sedang mengalami aliran kewangan yang amat susah atau menyusahkan pada waktu ini? YB Tuan Fadli.
Terima kasih. Sekali lagi saya terpaksa mohon untuk keluar sekejap lagi sebab saya perlu berada dalam dewan pula, join perbahasan dalam dewan. Apa yang ditanya tadi, saya nak tambah apa yang disebut oleh YB Amira tadi berkenaan dengan peruntukan terhadap adun ataupun ahli parlimen yang perlu diberikan secara berkapita. Secara asasnya saya juga boleh setujulah dengan hujah beliau yang saya kira agak logik sebenarnya. Bayangkan, saya ambil contoh kalau di Bangi 300,000 pengundi, sedangkan di parlimen saya 90,000 pengundi, tapi diberikan peruntukan yang sama, sedangkan votersnya adalah 3 kali ganda. Jadi, tapi untuk sampai kepada peringkat ini, saya fikir kena perbincangan yang lebih panjang lagi perlu untuk dilaksanakan. Tapi itu bagus untuk sebagai satu lontaran awal untuk kita semua fikir macam mana ia boleh diubah. Pada pandangan saya, dengan iklim politik yang ada pada hari ini, ia memerlukan suatu langkah yang panjang untuk sampai ke situ. Berkenaan dengan peruntukan yang dikurangkan, Saudara Benedict, ya, kalau kita tengok di luar negara, kami ahli parlimen dan adun ini disebut sebagai lawmaker, iaitu pembuat undang-undang. Pembuat undang-undang pada dasarnya mereka hanya meluluskan undang-undang di dalam dewan. Tetapi di Malaysia kita digelar sebagai wakil rakyat, wakil kepada rakyat, menyebabkan apa jua benda rakyat akan cari kita. Itu isunya yang ada pada hari ini. So, bersih sebagai suatu organisasi yang saya fikir boleh bergerak ke depan di dalam membentuk kembali pemikiran rakyat ke arah menganggap adun atau ahli parlimen ini mereka sebagai lawmaker, mereka sebagai pembuat undang-undang. Dari di atas kertasnya betul, iaitu kita di atas kertasnya protokol itu sudah ada kepada setiap agensi, tetapi realitinya semua perkara itu ada SOP-nya yang tersendiri. Rakyat nak minta zinc, katalah zinc bocor, katalah. Rakyat terpaksa sibuk orang pergi ke JKM, angkat kertas kerja. JKM pula mohon kepada 4-5 lapis sehingga 3 bulan baru zinc itu dapat digantikan. Mohon kepada YB, pagi mohon, tengah hari kontraktor dah hantar zinc. Jadi ini perkara yang perlu kepada perubahan corak fikir atau perubahan paradigma. Saya tak kisah peruntukan dikurangkan atau ditambah terpulang kepada kerajaan. Tetapi kalau satu MP dapat 1.5 juta, let's say, orang lain pun kena dapat 1.5 juta lah. Itu barulah. Maksudnya itu adil kalau base kepada jumlah. Kalau nak base kepada ada justifikasi, contoh bilangan voters, itu pun tidak ada masalah. Tapi biarlah justifikasi itu justifikasi yang boleh diterima. Soal nak kurang, nak naik itu, kerajaan mungkin melihat bahawa delivery system itu ialah kepada agensi-agensi kerajaan. Okey? Tidak ada masalah. Saya ambil contoh banjir yang berlaku di kawasan saya, Pasir Mas, baru-baru ini. Kerajaan tidak melalui ahli parlimen. Dia terus kepada pejabat tanah bagi kepada mangsa. Saya tanya tadi, mangsa dah dapat. Ada yang dah dapat RM1,000 Malaysia satu setiap orang. Saya tak kisah, tidak ada masalah kerana dah sampai kepada penerima. Yang isunya ialah kalau MP kerajaan dapat sebanyak ini, maka kenapa kami sebagai MP pembangkang tak dapat, yang menyebabkan rakyat akan persoal. Itu sahaja. Saudara Benedict, saya minta maaf, paksa untuk nak mohon diri. Pada awalnya saya tak jangka malam ni masih lagi sidang parlimen masih berlarutan sehingga ke malam, lewat malam. So terima kasih kerana menjemput saya. InsyaAllah kita harapkan supaya kita akan dapat bersama pada masa yang akan datang. Thank you, bersih. Terima kasih. Selamat.
Terima kasih YB Fadli. Terima kasih kerana masih menyertai kita walaupun terpaksa dari parlimen pada hari ini. Terima kasih. I mean, it's true what YB Fadli said, you know, that the role of our MPs is actually to be lawmakers, right? Not just to be the saviors of the constituents or the person you go to. If you have any trouble in the world, it's like the wizard or the magician that will solve all your problems. Yeah, on that, YB Amira, I would like to ask for your perspective, being an Adun for, I think, 2 years now. Yeah, what is your experience of 1 year? 1 year, yeah. What is your experience on that, and how do you think, like YB Tuan Fadli was saying, kita memerlukan anjakan paradigma of the role of wakil rakyat, bukan saja untuk menyelesaikan longkang tersumbat, menyelesaikan zinc bocor, tetapi lebih kepada lawmaker. How do you think that needs to change, and what has been your experience as an Adun in Puteri Wangsa?
I have to 100% agree with YP Fadli just now. Recent experience, for example, I posted about the fact that I have to go to the US for an IVLP program. And under that post, there was a comment which says, but if you're gone for 1 month, what will happen if there's fire? What will happen if there's flood? You know, and someone else commented, not me, but someone else on behalf of me commented, well, if there's fire and flood, you call for police. And I think that has been a very, you know, that is how it has been for the past 1 year, and I think it has been like that for many MPs and ADUNs. That the actual duty for MP and ADUN are to be legislators. And so we're supposed to, you know, if we are not in the State Legislative Assembly, or if we're not in the Parliament debating, we should spend the rest of the time to, you know, actually do research, to do analysis, to discuss with the people on what kind of law that our constituency would want us to raise in the State Legislative Hall. But that rarely happened. And so, to be very honest, I think more than 60% of the job in my office have been about, you know, reports about stray dogs, reports about bees, and I've even gotten a call about husband and wife fighting at home. And so the service center has sort of become like a one-stop center, and it's a lot of like a chicken and egg issue as well. The people are not aware about where to channel these kind of issues, especially the distinction between local councils and state legislator is very blurred to them. When we're talking about pothole issue, for example, they don't know who the local councillors are, and this is separate topic altogether, but this is also part of the reason why I strongly believe that we have to bring back local council election. But because ADUN is more familiar to them than local councillor, they would all go to ADUN to speak about these issues. But also at the same time, why I say it's a chicken and egg issue, because us as ADUN or as MP, we also do not want to tell our constituency, hey, look, that's not our duty, you know, because if you say that, people will say, oh, we voted for you, but you don't want to work and stuff like that. And so at the end of the day, we entertain all these kind of cases. And so the more you entertain these cases and the more they see that you are able to solve these cases for them, the more they say, hey, if I, you know, make a report to CISPA, nothing happens. But if I go to Amira's office, you know, she will get it done. And so it's better for me to go to Amira's office directly. So these kind of issues will continue on and on and on. On another level, I also feel that it's kind of fair for people to expect us to do more than just being in the hall. Let's say, for example, in Johor, total number of days that we are in the State Legislative Hall is only 21 days. Only 21 days. And so every month we are paid salary and we receive allocation. But of course, people will question that if you are given salary from, you know, the people's tax money every month, but you only sit in the State Legislative Hall for only 21 days per year, why are the people paying you? And so I think these kind of things are a complete ecosystem reform that we have to do in order to make people understand. And so I kind of agree that also the fact about this whole CDF thing, one of the most important part also, it will also shift the focus of legislators from doing legislation work to being contractors and also being, JKM suddenly, and in some cases like mine, suddenly marriage counselors. Yeah.
Thank you, Amira, for being so frank and honest about the sharing. I'm really intrigued by the experiences that you have, even husband and wife quarreling. Yeah, included. Yeah, probably that's part of lawmaking, you know, making sure they do not. Yeah, never mind. But it's really interesting what you've shared with us, and I think Shri, to get you on board to share your perspective as a researcher, that you've been researching on this for a very long time, especially when it comes to institutional reform and the role of lawmakers. what do you have to say about this? Yeah, how can we improve this scenario or situation?
The paper that Ideas and Bersih released about 2 years ago actually have this long-term proposal, which is exactly to put back the role of the MPs, to return them to their, original state of being the lawmakers. And for that reason, we have 3 stages of reform. I think if you read the papers. So we had, I think, 2 or 3 consultation forum with the MPs. And one of the concern here is this. I mean, the fact that there is a real need out there, that our service delivery, for some reason, is not effective. Exactly what YB Fadli just said just now. Minta zing dekat local council or some JKR, tak sampai 3 bulan pun tak sampai. Ask MP, one day pun sampai. So there is a need to understand what is wrong with our public service delivery. I think that's the first one. Until we have that sorted out, it's very difficult to have the MPs actually completely just removing it. And for that reason, we want to create this gradual reform. However, the current status quo of CDF cannot just stay like this. And for that reason, our ask for now, let's see, before this, a very ideal condition actually happen, let's make the CDF transparent, equitable. So that, like YB partly said, why my colleague from the government gets the money, get to hand out the money, which also means you get the credit, right? I mean, you get the credit, you get 1/4 already for showing your face there with money, while the opposition MPs don't even have that chance. So that the problem is not so much about providing that, the problem is it creates an equal political competition. And in democracy, that's not good, right? We want to have everyone have equal chance of being elected. If one party, because of their position in the ruling party, have that, a really, really upper hand. Of course, being a ruling party, you always have a ruling, upper hand. But really, really created by a system, it's impossible practically for opposition to get that chance. So I think that's something that we need to work on. Hold on, I have this, but just one more point. I think in our paper, one of the things that we can do, in addition to understanding what's the problem with our service delivery, is first thing that we can do is increasing the number of sitting days. I mean, Amira just said this now, Amira, it's only 21 days in a year in ADUN, and at the federal level, 60 days. In other countries, they have 90 days, at least in a year. So I think that's the first thing. I really want to see this happen, to actually increase the sitting days in both ADUN and MPs. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Sri, for sharing that. Yes, we need to ensure that our members of parliament and our ADUNs, our state legislative assembly men and women, are present more in parliament, more than just 21 days per year. I think that's one thing that's very, very important, to get them also to have research teams, like what YB Amira said earlier, research on policy, because we need good policy makers in our country, not just to solve bread but the day-to-day issues for the matter. Yeah, just for everyone's notice, because YB Fadli had to leave earlier to attend to issues in Parliament. Also, YB Howard might be joining us later if he manages to speak and his speech presentation in Parliament. We will also have right now Thomas Fan, Chairperson of Bersih, join us on the panel together to answer any questions that you might have. In just a very short moment, I'll open the session for a session of Q&A. But before we do that, I want to highlight one final point that we haven't really discussed yet, which is having a bill or an act. One thing very interesting that YB Tuan Fadli pointed out earlier is the current political climate, or iklim politik. Even the Prime Minister this morning mentioned it, that he mentioned in the phrase, pihak pembangkang yang berbusuk. There is this animosity going on between the government and the opposition. But then the Prime Minister also said, kalau cepat selesai, cepat lulus. Kalau selesai esok, lose lah kita boleh lose. You know, but YB Tuan Fadli was saying that it might be a long journey to get equitable CDF going. What more? An act in the long term. So just talking about a bill, setting it in stone, I just want to ask YB Amira first, what are your thoughts on, first of all, what made the difference in Johor? Why is there such a healthy political climate between government and opposition? I don't that you all managed to get equitable CDF at the moment, or equitable allocations, sorry, at the moment. And do you think this will lead on to an act in the future? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the situation in Johor was unique at that point of time because there was sort of like the government and the opposition, a number of government and also opposition is almost equal with difference of one legislator. And so I think I must also give credit to Datuk Hasni, which was the former MB at that point of time, for putting that particular equal allocation in place. And that was then brought into manifesto in PRN Johor. And so it was carried through by Dato' On as well. I think one thing for sure is that when you can see that there's progress from that particular part, and for Barisan Nasional, for example, they can see, because usually I think most politicians feel that we don't want to give equal allocation to oppositions because then it will give opposition advantage, like Puan Sri mentioned just now, rather than keeping all the resources to the current government of the day. I think what has been proven true for Johor, for example, giving equal allocations for the opposition has actually given a good image of the current government. And so even though say that during Dato' Hasni's time, he gave equal allocation to opposition, which is Pakatan Harapan, but that doesn't ensure, that doesn't suddenly change that, oh, Pakatan Harapan suddenly has a higher advantage to win over Barisan Nasional. So I think from that particular part, you can see that, politicians in Johor, at the very least, are more open to the idea of equal allocations. Of course, there are a lot of discussions of, at least government should have a little bit more. But so far, as of this year, we can see that we have received still equal allocation. I do hope that it means a more positive effect in making it a bill or making it a law. But I think more importantly, it's not just at state level. Most importantly is to make it a law at the federal level. But it's quite difficult. I can understand why YB Fadli mentioned that it takes a long time, because as YB Fadli mentioned just now, when government said that, oh, why should we give you equal allocation? Because when we were in opposition, you didn't give us equal allocation. And that kind of cycle will continue and continue. And so there's not really political will in the parliament itself for people to actually pass the law for CDF, which I think that is when a huge responsibility comes for the civil society organizations and general public to push for these laws. And I think in Malaysia right now, we can see that as we go further and further, I think we can see that now civil society organizations' roles are being taken more seriously in Malaysia in comparison to previous days. And so if there are more organizations and more push from general public for this equitable CDF, politicians can't just turn a deaf ear when the people are demanding for it. But it cannot be just the effort of, one or two CSO. It cannot be just an effort of one or two lawmakers. It has to be a concerted effort by many, many different people and different organizations at the same time.
Thank you, YB Amira. I love what you said about the role of CSOs and the general public. And I think this is something that Versi has championed for a long, long time. So, Thomas, what are your thoughts on this? Beyond just a CSO, what can the general public do practically to bring us to the finishing line of an equitable CDF bill on Act?
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, I think the role of the CSO over the last 4-5 years, calling very clearly for equal or equitable CDF, I think has mainstreamed this discussion. You know, it was just, I think, a given last time that if you are in government, you will have all the allocation, but if you're in opposition, you won't get any. But I think over the last few years, we have seen different states, like you say, Johor, Perak, making this equal allocation a norm, and even political party making that part of their manifesto, as we saw in the Johor state election last year, where Barisan Nasional, I think, probably, if I'm not mistaken, for the first time, included political reformation, and equal CDF was one of those promises that they made and fulfilled. So I think CSO can only do that much, but we need the public to be behind it. The way the public was behind, say, the anti-hopping law or Undi 18, you know, because the public wanted it, no politician dared to say no. You know, that is the kind of advocacy that we want to reach. And I think CDF is reaching there, but there's a few objections that I noted from the public. You know, people who say, why give to corrupt politicians? No, the other sides are always corrupt. To some supporters, you know, the other side are always corrupt. I just want to say that all politicians, if there is no transparency, no law, can be tempted to be corrupt. Doesn't matter which side, doesn't matter. So I just want to say that allocations are not blank checks. You know, they are not blank checks. I think Sri Muniati and Amira did allude to that they are strict guidelines. How much can be given for what purpose? For organization, for development, and for running of office, things like that. And even these are not blank checks. The organization that you give to, they have to fit certain criteria. You know, they are registered with ROS, they are operating within your constituency, and there's a limit amount, how much you can give. And when it comes to giving to, say, development purposes, oftentimes it has to go through the implementation and coordination unit under the Prime Minister Department for approval. And I understand it's not always so straightforward or easy. So there are reporting and accountability needed. So it's not a blank check. When we talk about giving to the other side, opposition or what, there are accountability required. But a very important point, why Malaysia at this point need to move towards giving of equal CDF and other institutional reform, is because we need political stability. You know, if the opposition are punished, the opposition are deprived, is it any wonder that they constantly plot and scheme to overthrow the government of the day, so that they can then be in the position of being the government and getting all the needed resources? You know, for the sake of stability that our country needs so much, I think we need to start looking at all these measures, you know, that treat opposition with due respect and allow opposition to play their very important role as check and balance to the government of the day until the next general election, so that they then can contest in an election to win the votes of the people, not constantly plotting and planning and scheming and thinking that is normal in a democracy. It is not normal. Yes, legally it's allowed, but it is damaging to a democracy and to the country if there is constant political instability. So I want us, the public, to start thinking in terms of that, you know, it is the right thing to do. And, it is promised in the manifesto, and it is also for political stability.
If I can just add a little on that particular part.
Sure.
Because last year we've been through 2 political campaigns. And I think it's important for us to bring back the discussion and the role, to measure a legislator based on the policies that they talk about. But what happened is when you don't have equal allocation, people will be saying that, oh, I don't want to vote for this particular person because, he couldn't give me financial aid when I need it, for example, instead of focusing it on what kind of policies that this person wants to bring on the table. So I think if you give an equitable allocation for all MPs and ADUNs and make it a law instead of, as I mentioned, just making it as whatever the current Prime Minister, the current government feels like doing, then we can shift back the role of MP and ADUN to making law, to making policies, rather than being seen as whether or not this person can give financial aid, whether or not this person can give donation to the communities.
Thank you, Ivy and Mira, and thank you, Thomas Fan, for the point made. When I was hearing Thomas, when you were sharing earlier about why, in this unstable political climate, I think all the more it's important to have a bill or an act in place, just in case the day when a government loses its majority in parliament and they become the opposition, is it going to be a tit for tat again for them? But if there's an act in place, at least they are safeguarding their future as opposition MPs to ensure that they have equal or at least equitable allocations in the long term for them also. That is not a tit for tat revenge situation that always happens time and time again. I think that's really, really important. One final question before we open it for the Q&A for all our participants. So if you have any questions, please, you can type it in the chat. We'll definitely be answering your questions. Sri Muniati, just referring to what the Prime Minister said this morning, with all you need to do is just to meet each other, negotiate, and then they can have equitable allocations in the near future. What is the likelihood of this happening, and what do you think is the likelihood of the CDF bill being tabled in doing this in the next 5 years?
That's a $1 million question that you have to ask the Prime Minister. But of course, I really hope, Bersih and Ideas and other civil society organization actually is now working on a draft bill for CDF, at least for the state level for now, because we saw some good practice already in Johor, in Perak. So I thought, it's practice already, and it's been 2 years going on. Maybe it's time to actually introduce the legislation at the state level first. So we are now with the team, with Bersih team, actually drafting the bill, and we will share this with ADUN, with the public. At least we want to see. I think there was an attempt before from YB Gui to actually have this. In fact, probably was tabled as a private member's bill, but it didn't happen. So there was an attempt. Now we're taking some of the ideas from that bill, and then we also take some of the ideas from our paper, and we are drafting a new bill now. So tune to this space. We will share with you. We want to have everyone involved, of course, especially the ADUNs, and to see that this is possible. I think if there is some sort of model of how it looks like, it probably will push the direction of the reform faster. That's what I really hope. So with this, we really hope that actually it can happen at least one of the states or 2 states, or at federal level. Actually, we can have this within the next 5 years. And I think I just want to reiterate, it's very important. If everyone wants stability, it doesn't come only from being a majority government. It comes from a decent political competition, a decent way of you treating your enemies. And CDF is one way to do it.
Thank you so much, Sri Murniarti. Yes, I've been preaching for many sessions and many forums that the season right now is really ripe for harvest of reforms. Yeah, and we saw it with the party hopping law last year, and I mean we never knew that we could see in our day and age. You never know with CDF equals CDF and also local government elections and so on and so forth. There's so many reforms that our country really needs. Now, ladies and gentlemen, participants, we are moving to a session of Q&A. So if you have a question, type it out in the chat box. We already have one question coming in from Facebook. But before that, just want to highlight that unfortunately, it's going to be really hard for YB Howard Lee to join us.
Ben,
yeah. Sorry, Lavanya, yeah.
Just texted me and said he's coming in now.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Hello, YB Howard. Sorry, you're muted at the moment. Sorry, YB Howard, you're muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I just literally left the house because we had a bit of a quorum issue. So I'm really sorry. Anyway, I'm not going to explain. I can only apologize. I'm out here. Parliament is still running. So yeah, I'm really sorry. I know I've probably just managed to catch the tail end.
All right, thank you so much for joining us, even though a busy schedule, and we were just talking about how important it is for our MPs to be primarily lawmakers, and that's what you're being today. We are seeing the reality of what you're doing today. So it's just an
unfortunate accident that just so happened that my slot had to be put right back. I'm really, really sorry.
No worries. Just just to really put you quickly on the spot, we were just talking about the $1 million question. Will we see an equitable CDF bill being tabled in Parliament during this Pakatan Harapan administration? I mean, knowing that you are part of the administration in the sense that you're part of DAP and also Pakatan Harapan, what are your thoughts on this?
Of course, I can tell you my thoughts. But in terms of giving you a concrete answer, whether or not we will see a constituency development fund bill, I really can't answer you because I am not part of the administration. So that's the reality. I'm but a backbencher. But of course, if you were to ask me personally as an individual, I will speak with in my capacity as someone who formerly was part of a state cabinet. At that particular time, out of 11 of us, the Menteri Besar plus the 10 state exco, I was one of the 3 who, I was the one who suggested it, brought it up in the state cabinet in a state exco meeting. I suggested it, and there were 2 others out of 11 of us who agreed, but alas, it was actually rejected. So this is something that is extremely close to my heart. But of course, there's always a fiscal implication that is attached to that. And I must also point out that there has been a drastic, I wouldn't use the term drop, but there is a huge difference between what used to be the Constituent Development Fund for the MPs in the previous parliament in comparison to what there is now. I mean, you're talking about up to 60%. So it's a huge drop. Now, nonetheless, I think the Prime Minister actually made it quite clear that actually constituency development funds are up for discussion for opposition MPs. And let's be frank, this is what we're talking about. Whether or not the opposition MPs are willing and are open to having that discussion with the administration. And again, I must stress, I'm not part of the administration. And of course, if it is something that is brought by the government, I would fully support it. Albeit, you're hearing all these kind of rumors that is really hitting on investment confidence, that's really hitting on the confidence of the government. You have senior figures from the opposition now saying that they are now, working on the usaha masih sedang dijalankan or something like that, that they're here to remove or unseat this government, but nonetheless, it's in terms of a position that if I was to be asked to take, I would take a position that it is something that if the government was to put on the table, I would support. So I'm sorry I didn't answer your question. Your answer is, will we see one? Well, I can't answer you that because I'm not part of the administration.
Sure. Just one more quick question before we continue with the Q&A session. Earlier, YB Amira was sharing from the Johor experience of how equal CDF in this case of Johor. Now, from your experience in the State Legislative Assembly in Perak, what are the lessons that the federal government or both government and opposition MPs can learn from the Perak state government in terms of allocating equitable funds for both government and opposition?
And of course, I must, at least my presumption would be in Perak, the fact that there is now equal allocations for, opposition and government supporting backbenchers is presumably there was a discussion. Presumably there were, I hate using the term negotiation, but I would assume that discussions were had, whether it was, a bilateral between the opposition as a group with the government, or it was a trilateral or multilateral between all aduns. I'm not sure because I'm no longer in that house, so I'm not privy to some of that discussions. But as someone who was involved, I would say I was just going to say knee deep, but it's actually shoulder deep in one of the first ever kind of precedents that was set, which is to equal allocations for all when there was a change of the Menteri Besar in Perak. Of course, it definitely changes dynamics a little bit. Was it a paradigm shift? Yes, it can be said it was a paradigm shift, but even that was a negotiated or a discussed. There was a consensus rather than something that was legislated. And of course, I'm happy. I'm proud to have been part of that first precedence of at least not systemically, not legislatively, but in actual real deliverance. The delivery of that constituency development fund was done. Now, of course, there are still problems with it because having constituency development funds means that there are expectations from your voters, from your constituents, from the community in general. But the problem would be actually there are deeper questions to ask, which is number one, are we going to be able to legislate it? And again, until and unless I'm in the executive to look at the fiscal implications, the fiscal room that is available, number one. Number two, the legislative implications surrounding legislating something like that. I can't give you a proper answer. But I think what makes a difference is, yes, you do have that at your disposal, but it just brings a lot more work because you're just merely delivering assistance that is sorely needed. But in terms of real reforms, real kind of changes of laws, you don't have that. You still don't have that if you're not part of the government. So it's good. It is something good to have, but it doesn't solve all problems. Far from it, actually. Yeah.
Thank you, YB Howard, for sharing this. I think you highlighted the fiscal implications, the legal implications. It's very much more complicated than what we see from the general public's point of view, yeah?
Yeah.
And I think Sri Muniati, you wanted to comment about something that YB Howard was sharing, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I think on the allocation, I understand that we have a very limited fiscal space now, and any reductions of an expenditure is always welcome. But I think there are questions that I really want to ask. I hope you can ask it in Parliament. First, parliamentary allocation for Parliament comes from Prime Minister Department. As far as I can see the budget documents, the allocation to the Prime Minister Department for both operating and development expenditure increased. So if we talk about fiscal space here, there is a fiscal space within the Prime Minister Department. Secondly, from the previous, I think, under PH government, we know for sure that one of the sources for the peruntukan ahli parlimen is Project Mesra Rakyat. And this allocation remains. The number is equals with 2022. So when we talk about reduction, where is the reduction coming from? It's still 444 million from Project Mesra Rakyat. So if the government now talking about reductions, are we saying that Project Mesra Rakyat will not be delivered by Parliament anymore? Or is it going to be delivered by the civil service? So I think that's another question. I understand that there is a decrease in terms of outright grant to the ICU, and that's probably where the reduction come from. But the Project Mesra Rakyat remain the same. So which reductions of allocations actually happening here? The third one, we know from the past that project peruntukan ahli parlimen comes from peruntukan kepada YB Perdana Menteri. Is this allocation to Perdana Menteri also being reduced or not? Because we know, I mean, I think YB Liu Chintong in the past talks about slush fund of the Prime Minister. Are we still having it in our current system? And if, say, for example, would the reductions of the MP, allocation to the MPs also reflected in the reduction of the allocation to the Prime Minister? I think those are questions that needs to be answered. It's beyond the fiscal space. So I think that's where the transparency is sorely needed. So thank you.
Thank you, Sri Mulyati. Sorry, YB, how about you? You're muted again.
Oh, am I to answer that now?
Do you want to?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I mean, very fantastic questions, and I'm fully and absolutely aware that PMR is definitely still in the budget, but the government has taken a position, or at least as of now, that PMR is going to be open for application by all MPs. Right? So can one consider that a constituency development fund specifically for each and every single parliament? At the moment, I would interpret it as no, but definitely there is a big lump and hunk of money put aside under PMR for MPs to apply, and the decision to luluskan, kuasa kelulusan, is still with ICU. So that is what I mean by a reduction, because at this particular juncture, the budi bicara or the kuasa kelulusan is actually not with the MPs. We can approve, we can apply, but the right to approve, like previous way, you can enter into ICU system and you can approve it. We don't have that, at least as of right now. Okay. In terms of what was the other question? Okay, let me make another point here. I think we've had several discussions in the past, very recently with Sri Mulyati about the Fiscal Responsibility Act that needs to be tabled, and apparently it was actually mentioned in Parliament the day after our discussion that there is going to be a Fiscal Responsibility Act table in Parliament, I think in, kalau tak silap lah, in June, in a sitting in June. So I think that's a great step forward, because all this that we're, questioning and asking questions about on, if there's 222 million, 222 million ke, whatever amount of money that there is and how it's going to be spent in detail, that transparency will be afforded by having a Fiscal Responsibility Act tabled in Parliament and hopefully passed. So I agree that there needs to be a lot more kind of institutionalization. But alas, this is the situation that I'm in. When I said, the questioning the fiscal space, well, I'm not saying I don't know specifically about the fiscal space for PMR, for peruntukan kawasan. I'm talking about the general fiscal space altogether. And I think at the moment, The only response I can give you is I think it will be great if we, at least it's going to start tomorrow. A lot of these that were raised at the policy debate level is going to be hopefully answered by the executive tomorrow. And let's hope that we're going to get some decent answers from the ministers.
Thank you, YB Howard, for that answer. Really concise, and I think a lot more to unpackage later on. In Parliament. Now, before YB Amira leaves us, because she's leave for a meeting at 9:30, there was a question coming from our Facebook audience, from Timothy Chandi. Much as we would like to see fair and equitable allocation to all MPs, can we expect MPs and aduns from different political parties to really implement such policy? Corruption and ideological contestation have been too deeply ingrained in their mindset. I think that's something that Thomas tackled earlier on corruption. Wabi Amira, would you like to share your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, as I've mentioned before, I think, of course, right, as of right now, it's quite difficult to imagine that such act will be passed in the parliament or even tabled in the first place. However, I think as Thomas mentioned just now as well, I think it's important for the discussion is getting, more and more prominent now in terms of CDF. I think people are more and more aware about the fact that, in before this, not many people are aware how much their MPs are getting allocation per year, how much their aduns are getting allocation per year. But now people are more aware about it. And so hopefully with this awareness, people will start demanding for their MPs and aduns for whatever, elected representative, the elected representative in their area to be given, to be receiving allocation to serve their particular constituency. However, I think, of course, also mentioned about the corruption part. I think it's also important for us to ensure that these allocated funds will have a certain form of transparency and accountability to it. Of course, for example, in Johor, and I assume this happens in other states as well, we have to submit sort of like a report on what we use our funds for. But it would also be great if this report can be made and published for the people to look at it publicly. So it's not just between us and the district office or between us and the state, but also to be published so that everyone can see what their representatives spend on when it comes to the allocation fund. And this will also give better accountability on the representative. I think most importantly is for the people to hold your lawmakers accountable on everything that they do. And this can happen when we have proper transparency, especially when it comes to funding. The journey is, I think, will be a bit tough. However, I don't think it's impossible. If you're asking a lot of other people before this, they would say Undi 18 will be impossible. They would say anti-party hopping law would be impossible. I've had a lot of, I think, YB Howard and we've had a lot of discussion. YB Howard, before this, felt that us forming Muda is impossible, for example, But a lot of the things that are deemed as impossible can be possible with a lot of effort from a lot of parties. I am, if nothing else, I'm a very hopeful person. And I hope that this is something that can be pursued by across all levels of society. Yeah, and I'm really sorry that I have to leave, but I'm sure I've spoken a lot, and I'm sure people would rather hear a lot more from YB Howard now he's here. And so thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope we'll be able to work together with Versi again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, YB Amira, for joining us. Really insightful discussion and points that you brought up. Thank you. Now, we're going to lengthen it just shortly. Anybody has any other questions, you can unmute yourself. Those of you on Zoom, you can unmute yourself and ask YB Howard or Sri Muniarti or Thomas Fan any questions that you would like to ask. I think there is one coming in from the chat from Elisha. I hope I got your name right, Elisha Mohammed Fadzil, to just ask you a question related on the point you brought up, YB Howard. on Project Mesra Rakyat. PMR, are there a set of requirements for MPs since there's approval process who are interested to apply for the PMR? If so, what are they? What are the requirements for this PMR approval process? Yeah.
Mute, sorry. Yeah. By the way, before it's made another issue of how I sit, it's just the way these chairs are. You know, it's not very comfortable, but kononnya how I sit because of the chair pun boleh jadi issue. So I'm just gonna apologize in advance for how I sit. But okay, PMR. Now, of course, I've not been officially briefed on PMR because we've not had PMR yet, at least for this parliament. So belum dapat, tak tahu lah sangat. But from what I can understand is it is kind of project-based, of which is channeled directly to implementation agencies. By and large, it's either PBT or your local government and or your district officers. Now, at the risk of sounding a little bit dismissive of that, there have been times in the past where when I was in Adun, when my MP and I would sit down and talk about how to, allocate and expend some of the PMR, we would, go off on the limb and get quotations for, let's say, for example, just to, put a cover over an outdoor basketball court or something. And I wouldn't say more often than not, almost 9.999% of the out of 10 times, the quote in which we would get from private sector, even if you were to factor in 10% over expenditure on implementation, it is still way, way, way cheaper than what would actually end up being expended by some of these kind of approved contractors under the district office and or MBI, because the specs would be much higher, and for some reason, it's more expensive lah. Okay, I'm going to be very, very careful in what I say here without making accusations that are, allegedly unfounded. But I could, like I said, more than 9.999 times out of 10. It's a lot more expensive, some by even 20–30%. So nonetheless, I think one of the things that we should really look into is, let's say for PMR or even for some of the aduns, in Perak, there used to be, out of 300,000 ringgit allocations for each and every single adun, OG outright grant is only 100,000. The other 200,000 is actually bawah pemacu, which has to be and can only be implemented and or expended through district office managed projects. So it's pretty much exactly the same like PMR, where the money actually does not enter your account. You just say, I want 100,000 spent on this, and you have to get a quote for about 70% or 80% of that. Otherwise, you'll have to approve a larger sum. And 9 times out of 10, there are some degree of tender for certain kind of quantum of allocation, and if it's above, it has to be tendered. But some that are smaller, if I'm not mistaken, 20%, you can just provide a few quotations rather than just having it tendered. So again, I don't want to use the word bureaucracy, but there is a certain layer of processing that is necessary and needed. But sometimes the expectation of this is an expectation management argument I want to put forth, that the expectation is your MP will come, allocate you 100,000 ringgit to put a cover over your basketball court or your volleyball court or your futsal court, but in the end, it doesn't happen straight away. It's not like you can appoint the contractor there and then have it done. You have to wait anywhere between 2 to 3 months before work even can start. So, and more often than not, there's a lot of kind of negotiations that happen. This is if contractor yang dapat contract tak lari, things don't go wrong, all this kind of stuff. So there's a certain degree of expectation management that we need to have, and it is the role and the work of the MP and or the elected official to oversee that, because you're the project owner per se. I don't know if I answered the question, but that's all the answer I can give you.
Yeah, because I think this is a program that is not, I mean, the guidelines are not issued yet, right? In black and white.
At least not to the new MPs anyways.
I see. But thanks for sharing from your perspective and your experience also on how this PMR and the guidelines work. Yeah, also from the ground, the perspective from an adult on the ground previously. So is there any other questions from our participants before we close the session? I think not. So before we close the session, just want to open to our panelists once again. Just 1 minute of final remarks. What is your vision for CDF in Malaysia? Any final thoughts that you want to leave with our audience? Sri, would you want to go first?
I think I will stand with the recommendation that we put forward about 2 years ago on CDF, that we want the MP's primary job is to be lawmakers, but we understand that in the Malaysian context at this moment, there are certain needs for MPs to deliver some certain public services and assistance to the public. And for that reason, and if it's true constituency development fund, that it needs to be legislated, it needs to be made transparent, accountable. There is a process now, but it's not transparent enough, and especially because it comes from the Prime Minister special allocation. And I think so the problem is not only CDF, but also making sure that this special allocation to the Prime Minister be also made transparent. And secondly, I think it's, of course, CDF is also touched into a broader reform of Parliament. We not only need allocation for MPs to do all this job, but also an allocation for MPs for their office to do research, to do proper policy making. I don't know whether, I don't think CDF will be able to accommodate that. So I think this allocation need to be coming or need to be regulated by other legislation. So I really hope that, I think the current government, with the majority it has, I know it's still very much, risky, but can take this opportunity to move things forward with this such, quite big majority it has. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sri. And now to you, Thomas Fan.
Thank you. I want to borrow a phrase from the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, I think last year or the year before, where he said that he would like to see, politics in this country where the winner doesn't win everything, the loser doesn't lose everything. And we have gone through, I think, 2-3 years of pandemic plus political instability. And it is about time. I think it is time now for this new government, the unity government, to actually put into practice some of this reform where we do not see quote unquote losers, the opposition, being denied their rightful recognition and resources to function as a responsible opposition. Because the reality is that if you don't treat opposition with respect and recognition, can you blame them if they want to overthrow you? Can you blame them if they are looking for a way so that they can get some of the resources that they need in order to function as an elected representative? So what I think is difficult is that this issue of constituency development fund allocation is still the budi bicara of the Prime Minister. And because of that, it's always so far used as something to be negotiated. Ismail Sabri gave equal CDF to Pakatan because as part of the negotiation of the MOU, not because he suddenly had an enlightening moment and wanted to feel generous about it. Not at all. And I personally am actually a bit disappointed by this morning's speech by our current Prime Minister that it is to be negotiated. No, it is actually a matter of principle, a matter of promise, and a matter of political stability. By the way, all start with P, you know. That CDF as one of the lowest hanging fruit should be given to the opposition as a sign of good faith that this government, you know, is serious about reformasi. This government is serious about taking our country to another level of political stability and maturity. So we certainly hope that by this year, it will be legislated either through a CDF bill or through Parliament. That I don't know whether it's possible that Parliament under the Parliamentary Services Act can give some of this allocation to all members of the House. So I think this is my wish for this year.
Thank you, Thomas. Well, principle, promise, and political stability. Thank you so much, Thomas, for that. And now, Wabi Howard, on to you. Your final remarks. Yeah, just... Sorry, you muted again.
Mute. Okay. Everything that Thomas said, I agree with. I think fundamentally, I can only speak with my own experience and my own track record, of which this is something I support. This is something that I would like to see happen. But, you know, when you say there are no winners and there are no losers, is what we like to see. But in the Westminster system, you know, there is no parliamentary primacy because, you know, we have a constitution. So therefore, the system and structure that we have is the executive wins. That is unfortunately the reality that we're in. And the other one, you know, this is with no prejudice and the least amount of kind of trying to put the blame on someone else's shoulder. I must say that, you know, although Harapan did put some of these reform agendas on the table, the government now consists of kind of 4 coalitions per se. I am not a party of the discussions in cabinet and at the kind of the grand coalition. I don't know what the term is. The meeting and the coordinating council of both the GPS, GRS, BN and PH and all who support. I'm not part of that discussion, so I can't speak with authority, but surely I can only presume that there are resistance there. Okay, and I'm not saying that it's a valid argument that because there's resistance, there's, you know, no need to push lah. I will go and push. I will continue to speak up on this. And in fact, it's not just me. I've heard that Goping, in fact, Goping, when we were in the state cabinet together, he was one of the other. Him and I were the 2 of the 3 who did push for it. So, of course, it is something that's very close to our hearts. But the fact is, we're but backbencher yang kecil dan kerdil. But and of course, you know, I'd like to see that happen. But you know, whether we'll see it this year or not, I'm not sure because I'm not the law minister.
If I may, just a minor correction. I don't mean that there's no winner or losers. I know there will be winners, but what the Agong say is winner don't win everything.
Win all.
Yeah, win all and loser lose all. I think that's the important point.
Thank you so much once again, all our panelists, for joining us today to share, despite your busy schedules. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. I think from me, what I can say is with our panelists, especially the YBs, we know that Malaysia rests in really good hands in the young MPs that we have. Those visionary MPs who stand for what they believe in. I think it's really exciting for Malaysia. I'm hopeful for my children, to grow up in a much better Malaysia than I did, than our previous generations did.
And I must say, I think there is one thing that at least Sri Muniati and I can celebrate. Hey, Fiscal Responsibility Act coming up in June. Yay! Yay! I mean, I haven't seen the draft, but in principle, ada lah, itu sudah lah, hebat.
So keep on pushing. For those who are joining us, ladies and gentlemen, keep on pushing for reforms from whatever you can, for the many channels that you have influence in, your spheres of influence. Continue doing that for a better Malaysia. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night. I'm going back into the house.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks.